told us. We started these 3 series with an idea of making this the unconference FinTech Women version of a deep dive. And it's been pretty interesting. We started off by saying, what is artificial intelligence? What is it doing? So everybody's been talking about artificial intelligence for a bit. And is it coming off the hype cycle? Is it staying on top? Is it going to hover there for a bit? What is interesting for us is where we started kind of diving into this with Katie King initiating the conversation and telling us globally what's happening with artificial intelligence, AI, and also what are some of the kind of key focus in financial services. And that conversation then took us down the path of appreciating what does it take to design artificial intelligence. And in today's session, we're kind of going to talk through the use and adoption. And for me, a large part of use and adoption is the commercialization. How do you make revenue from artificial intelligence? We know that almost every company worth its salt, every financial service worth its salt has got some kind of AI proof of concept in play. We know there are numerous fintechs designing, putting solutions, even in our own backyard in Boston, putting solutions out there. But truly, what does it mean? What should any of us as users, entrepreneurs, perhaps, folks working within organizations, within mature organizations, think through when we're talking about commercializing artificial intelligence solutions? So that's the focus of today's conversation. And my guest today, it's, as we joked in our prep session, is the Sen and Ken tour that we have. I'm going to introduce them at a very high level and then have each of them talk a little bit about themselves. And from there, we go into a little bit of conversation. So like always, feel free to add your questions onto the chat box. I have it open on the side. I'll be watching it. Both our guests are experienced enough and have a wide range of experience, to be honest. So they can take any question you throw their way. So do that. Don't hesitate. So with that, Senofer Mendoza is the founder and co-founder and an investor, and Ken Mooney is. I should probably start by saying Ken Mooney is really a friend of FinTech Women, longtime friend of FinTech Women, champion, ally, all of those good things. And so pleased to have him on the front stage instead of the back where he usually is. Financial services veteran, more recent, a FinTech investor, and both of you teach at Suffolk. So I'm going to stop there and have maybe Sen, you kick us off with an introduction and then have that hand over to you, Ken.
Yeah, sure. So I'm Senofer Mendoza. I'm co-founder and general partner at Mendoza Ventures. That was the other co-founder. We are an AI, fintech, and cybersecurity firm. We're based in Boston, but our LP base and our investment base is international. I came into this after COOing 2 startups. My background is in enterprise sales and marketing, and I grew into tech through that role, and then founded this firm in 2016 and transitioned full-time to this firm in 2018. So we've been doing this for a few years now. We're on our second fund, which is a $10 million fund, and we invest largely in the pre-seed and seed stage. And I'll hand it over to Ken to explain to you how he makes such impeccable investment decisions.
So I'm in the process of doing one of those in conjunction with Mendoza Ventures, I think. As far as my background, it's just really a long list. So I'm going to try to put it into 3 stages if I can. The initial stage of my career was really institutional based. Over 25 years in banking at State Street. I got great, credit training, customer training. But the thing that resonated with me the most is being the chief credit officer during the Great Recession, because that's really when I had to try to hone my people skills and resilience, and it's kind of in the face of systemic disaster potentially happening. So that was kind of one component. The second one would really be actually running something. It's important to be a banker and lend money and do those sort of things to support companies. But, I actually had never built anything. And so I went to become the president of a specialty metals company. We produce military parts, under license from Raytheon. So I learned how to actually manufacture something. It was good. The second thing would be I was president of a Fintech startup, a digital lending platform. So that was really cool. I will tell you that both of those things, the biggest thing on my mind was not only learning, it was meeting payroll. I mean, if you really want to start up a company, you have to worry about, things like that. The third part, I guess I would call the advisor, teacher, consultant, investor thing. Now, I've always been an investor in small companies, but what I decided to do is become an angel investor and also, become an LP in some funds and a lot of those, and I'll put in a plug for Sen right now, and I'm very interested in their fund. So I decided that I wanted to join them if they'll accept me. So I've done that. I'm looking at a lot of different pitches, things like that. But, advisor to a number of companies, doing some pro bono work with 2 companies using artificial intelligence, actually. But one of the most fun things I'm doing is I'm teaching intro to fintech to honors undergrads, which is great because what that's done is teach me a lot about the different components of fintech. And then I'm also doing a startup accelerator program with life science in conjunction with Children's Hospital, Harvard Medical, and a few other things. So the reason I decided to do that is because I know nothing about life science. And that's the way I learn. And when I learn about things, that's when I want to invest. So that's kind of who knows what the 4th stage will be, but those are the 3 first stages.
It's aspirational, your career path. That's what I'd say. It is also interesting. I think I've heard both of you speak about yourselves, but connecting the dots becomes so much more of, every time I hear you speak, connecting the dots becomes so much more easier, I think, because when I first met both of you, I didn't know that both of you work at Suffolk together, teach at Suffolk together, and now you also mentioned you're thinking of investing together. So that's pretty interesting. So we'll have really 2 perspectives aligned sometimes, perhaps, and perhaps not. So I'm looking forward to that. Talking about the focus of today's conversation was about adoption and use of artificial intelligence. And a big part about that is, for me, is commercialization, as I mentioned before. But before we talk about that, and Ken, you mentioned a little bit of this in our intro catch-up session prior to starting today, where we are in the world today. We are in the midst of a pandemic. We know that there's a long tail to recovery, and it's getting longer every single day as we hear more. Well, yes, I think at this point, some of us are not focusing on the results of the elections, but we know it's there and the market has been going in different places. And I think from a fintech and a fintech woman perspective, and what we want to share with our audience in this session, we started off thinking when the pandemic kicked off that all the new tech is going to have some kind of a lift, and particularly artificial intelligence through this kind of COVID lockdown pandemic period. With what's happening in the world today, what do you folks think? What is it doing for artificial intelligence?
Well, AI, is a technology that, it solves problems. It creates efficiencies. It helps with customer retention, but more importantly, I think it understands the data. There's so much data that we're faced with. How do you aggregate the data? How do you understand what the data means? It also can protect us too. Compliance and fraud and that sort of thing. You've seen a huge rise in the use of artificial intelligence in that. When I talk to my students about careers, I always mention artificial intelligence because, growth means there's opportunities. And I think I saw what the 5-year CAGR on artificial intelligence is over 46%. It's looking, the market over the next 5 years, the market is looking to grow to something like $400 billion. I think all of us touch upon artificial intelligence almost every day. You know, Citi has its chat bots. Bank of America has its Erica. JP Morgan has something called contract intelligence that reads its documents. And it reads thousands and thousands of documents in minutes that takes hundreds of hours to do. So, I mean, and then the other thing I look at is in terms of, you know, this is about careers. And, you know, artificial intelligence is going to, the numbers I've seen, it's going to replace a number of jobs. It'll create jobs, but it's going to replace jobs. I thought I saw a number as high as 230,000 over the next few years in just financial services alone. So artificial intelligence, I think, is a great opportunity. You know, COVID is just pushing us to, the digitization, which means more data. How do you understand that data? So I'm really bullish on artificial intelligence at this point.
Agassi keeps trying to get us to disagree, and we keep agreeing, but I agree with that assessment, and our firm belief that this is such a pervasive technology. When we were planning out our fund, we said, you know, fintech, obviously we're in Boston, cybersecurity is a growing market, and AI, so that if we find something cool that we really like, we can invest in it because it touches everything at this point. You could start a candle company tomorrow and AI would touch it, either in your supply chain or in something. I think the first beachhead of AI is creating efficiency. And I think we're there. I think any repetitive task is now everyone's starting to look at AI as a potential solution to alleviate that repetitive task, or anything that requires a lot of brain power to process, to recognize a pattern is really the first implementation. And we're there. I think where we will start to see it go is more on the predictive. Everyone loves to talk about predictive AI. And there's a lot of nuance to actually implementing predictive AI. And I think that's the direction that we'll see it start to turn towards. The fields of AI prediction and are still really clunky and ungraceful. And as that starts to get massaged out, I think that there's an incredible amount of potential there. And also we were chatting before we started about content generation. It is, the content that people will engage with is somewhat predictable. And that generation is AI is starting to infiltrate that first now on Instagram, but I don't think that we're so far away from it writing a Netflix script or something like that.
You know, if I could just add one.
Sure.
As far as artificial intelligence, it's not just about financial services, right? I'm working on two startup the pro bono projects right now. One is working with someone who's using artificial intelligence to simplify text for people with disabilities and people that are non-native English speakers. The other one is I'm working with a scientist right now who is using artificial intelligence to develop robust cancer drugs. So that's what's so cool, I think, about AI. It's perfect for financial services, but I think it's also great for many other things.
And I'm glad someone's using it to cure cancer, because we're just using it to make and save a lot of money.
Let's do both.
Yeah, keep that sense of humor coming, because we need that. You know, what's interesting is in what you said, and this is where I promised you I would deviate from our planned questions. I'm doing that right away. What's interesting about what you said is that I think so one part is you can't look at AI independently if you're looking at financial services. In the whole collection of new tech, you can't look at AI individually. You have to talk, if you're talking about future in progress, you talk about AI, blockchain, IoT, what is 5G going to do to all of this? And then there's the other part that you just mentioned, which is cross-vertical. And the reason that kind of caught my attention is because we keep talking and so much of our attention in fintech, but then there's also the tech fin aspect of it, right? What is Amazon doing? What is I forget the collaboration that they have along with health benefits provider, insurance benefits provider that Amazon has recently. We know what's happening with Alibaba and Ant in China, for instance. So there's a whole kind of cross collaboration. So for both of you, when you think about cross vertical, are you seeing any special kind of trends, perhaps quick hits, top of mind that comes to you?
The first thing that comes to mind for us is making other markets accessible to finance. So we work with a company out of San Jose called Listo, which means ready in Spanish. And the Latinx population in the U.S. is just financially undocumented, but not financially irresponsible. And there's no way to integrate that person who has, a 20-year financial history that has no credit score into something like a New York life insurance policy or a loan or any of those things. And so we're using AI to train up markers for financial responsibility along with the person so that they can start with a $200 loan and then work their way up from there and eventually get something like a life insurance product for the family whose primary wage earner is an Amazon warehouse worker. And so what we're finding is that AI is able to take this large data set and translate it into a way that's accessible to the finance industry. It's working almost in reverse. It's like it's making untapped populations more accessible to finance. And by doing that, making finance more accessible to untapped populations. Another great example is Senso out of Toronto that does mortgage predictors to get the CAC on a mortgage down from for a bank to sell a mortgage now, it's like $6,000 or $7,000. It's ridiculous. And if you guys have ever bought a mortgage or a house, it's a terrible experience. Like your bank advertises to you, it's offensive. So much wrong with it. And by fixing that and by giving the bank more information on their own customers, you can start solving a lot of problems for those customers and saving the bank's money and making everything more affordable.
That's really Ken, go ahead.
I was just going to say there's so many opportunities out there. Can I talk about a little bit of what my concerns are with artificial intelligence?
Sure.
Yeah. So I get concerned with bias, right? And I think I'm going to use an excellent example, I think, especially for this group. And that's where Goldman and Apple have combined to create I think it was a credit card and provide credit lines. And they were using artificial intelligence to do that. And it turned out that there was a bias against women. Women with exactly the same scores were getting lower credit lines. Saying they discovered it, but anything that's built by a human can have some sort of bias built in it. So I very things like that. It's a little bit of a black box. You don't always know. You get the answer, but you don't always know how to get to the answer. And then there was an example of something called Tweets, which was a Microsoft product, and it was a bot that you could tweet things at it and talk to it. Well, the people who were doing it soon realized that it was using machine learning and that it was coming back with answers to things. And if your tone was very negative, it was coming back with a very negative. So they actually had to shoot it down. So I think it's a fantastic tool. I'm a proponent. I would invest in it. But you asked me about trends, and it's not a trend, but I think, and I think I mentioned this before in the first AI call that we had. Andrew Hawking, it's AI can be either the best thing to happen to humanity or the worst thing. We don't know which. That was a question I asked, and that's how I feel about it. I'm pretty positive about it, but I think we have to be careful.
Well, sorry, go ahead, Sen.
AI knows what you tell it. We see a lot of funds that are starting to use AI to make investment decisions, to try and train up an algorithm to figure out, because essentially once you blitz scale a VC firm, you're looking for markers and you're training up associates usually to look for those markers. And so a lot of VCs have said, well, we could also get AI to do this, but you're training that algorithm on the history of venture capital, which is a white male history. And if you train something to look for white male success and then introduce into that success that looks or feels different or has different markers for success from that,
Yeah.
you're not going to get a hit. And so you have to be really careful what you're perpetuating when you implement it.
Yeah.
And I also think for things like investment decisions, it would never choose to invest in an emerging managers, and emerging managers traditionally outperform. And so there's a lot of flaw there. I think the people who work in the field are very aware of it, but it hasn't hit the mainstream yet in terms of getting the attention to the bias that it needs at all.
So it's so much. We can just talk about bias and the impact of that in AI for so much, because I think it ultimately can filter down to the conversation we're having today. How do you ensure adoption if the users, end users and consumers are apprehensive about bias, then, or any of these negative aspects, they're not going to use it. So I think I'm probably going to lead into another kind of other area of this conversation, which is also one of the teasers in our promotion. If you build it, will they come and buy it? And then what I'm hearing here is it's not just building it, and there's a lot more thought that is required in terms of how do you take an AI, conceptually an AI initiative, and then evaluate if it can be, if there's money to be had in it from a business standpoint. So from what you folks are seeing, how would you recommend that thought process be? How should somebody think about what does it mean? What does it mean to consider if this particular idea or concept will generate revenue?
Well, it's interesting. It's, build it and they will come. That's kind of the way I used to think when I was building parts for the military. It has to be perfect. Yeah. But I think in fintech, it's kind of the opposite. We use something called, the lean startup process. And it's not really build it and they will come. It's more about you have this great idea. Cool products don't always sell. And I was amazed when I did my research and I found that companies, what's the number one reason companies fail? They fail because people don't buy the product. So I think the idea is, with the lean startup process is that you go out, you do a lot of customer discovery, you find out what are their problems, what do they need to get solved. You have to be aware, but you want to really understand what they need, and you develop a product, and you get it out in the market as soon as possible. And I actually prepared a few slides if you want to show those, so we can just talk through it very quickly. But the lean startup methodology is actually something that was taken from software development. It's something that you want to get it out in the marketplace very quickly. So, the idea is you create, this idea for a product, or actually it's probably to solve a problem. And you formulate hypotheses, which is really the solution. And right in there, what you do is you're doing a lot of customer discovery. You talk to people that may use the product. You're not trying to sell them something. What you're trying to do is figure out, does this solve your problem? What would you like to see? Maybe how much you pay for it. And then you can create this MVP, this minimal viable product, and you get it out in the marketplace. Before, you would be petrified to send a product out in the market unless it was perfect. But by the time you do that, there may be more competitors, and maybe they moved on to a different product. So then you get out there and you test the MVP and you validate the hypotheses, you get feedback, you get the data, you learn from the data, you make the product better, and then you go back and you make the idea better, and then maybe you launch the product at that point. It's kind of this loop. Maybe we could go to the next page. And this is a lot of people understand this is a tool. It's actually can find this many different places. Leanstack.com is one place that you can check. But this is a one-page way to kind of encapsulate a startup company. And this actually could be a product you're developing for a large company too. And it just quickly on one page, it kind of gets you through the process of, gee, what's the problem? What's the solution? Do I have something that's unique about my product? Do I have an unfair advantage? Maybe I have a patent or something like that. Think about your customer segments, how you're going to sell your product, revenue streams and costs. And from this, you can develop your pitch books and in the way that you bring the product to market. And then maybe the last one, the last slide. And the whole thing is just this whole cycle that you go through, and you go through it very quickly. And it doesn't mean it works every time, but the thing that I like about it is you get the product out there in the market, you get feedback. Usually you go to people called early adopters, and they may be the most likely to buy your product. They have such severe problems, they're willing to try your product, which may not be totally complete. They give you feedback. In this iteration, you constantly go through this loop, and you make a better product. That's just kind of a quick way that I look at it. The customer models there could be a lot of different models. It could be subscription, it could be licensing, B2C, software as a service. There's a lot of different things. It depends on what the product is.
I think to echo what Ken said, your AI is not your art project, and even if you think it's perfect when you release it into the world, someone's going to come up with something else to do with it that you didn't think of. And so as soon as you can get it out there and just learn that it's not your art project, the faster you can make it closer to perfection. Jack, I think I mentioned this in our prep, and you said you wanted me to mention it here, so I'm going to bring it up.
Yep.
We weren't coached. This is the Challenger rocket actually exploded because they knew that and there's a really good Netflix documentary on this if anybody wants to see it, but I wouldn't watch it like this week. Maybe next week. They knew that the fuel was leaking through the O-rings, but there was no way to go back and reiterate on what they had built, because their whole cycle was build the perfect rocket, launch it in space as many times, shuttle, and launch it into space as many times as we could, and then put a teacher on it and let all the children watch it while they're in school. And so they tried to fix it as many ways as they could without making core modifications to the shuttle. But had they been able to have that spacing between launches to be able to iterate on the process the way that Ken showed you, that mistake could have been avoided. And I see it with startups all the time. Everyone thinks that they have the perfect thing, and they just haven't gotten it in enough hands outside of people who are, and you can't trust your friends and family with this. Like, they're always going to tell you it's a good idea. They just care about your feelings too much. You have to get it out to the users to see what they do with it.
I think that's good advice. Particularly, don't just hang around your friends and family, because you have to get out there and get that advice. And there's also something else that you said earlier that I want to get back to. When you folks were, there's just a question come in that I'm looking at. Maybe I can cover that now. When it comes to, so I'm kind of jumping, and I'll come back to the question I initially wanted to ask. When it comes to looking at go-to-market, so we spoke about what the entrepreneurs or what the builders of solutions should be looking at from commercializing it. But there's always there's also an idea out there. There's the first mover advantage, but the second mover generally makes it better, the better mousetrap, perhaps. Should organizations wait to see what comes out on top in terms of solutions, or should they be getting in right now at the ground floor to get those, get ahead of competition, so to speak?
I think, it's a competitive world. I think things that took 5 years to develop are developed in 1 year. And I think, it depends on your resources too. And it also depends, are you a small startup company? Are you a big company that's looking for a product? I think look at drug companies. Drug companies, they invest in small startup and small companies, and they buy the companies, right? Because
it's true.
That's how they do their product development. I just think there's no sense of laying back to wait for the perfect product or wait for other competitors, because there's so much competition. The story I'll use is fintech related is when we started Foundation, there's probably only 3 or 4 companies, major companies that were lending to small business on digital platforms. Now there's 200, probably, maybe 300. Oh, at this point, there's a lot of them. So I think if you have a good idea and you have a good team, I think you go right ahead with it. And it depends on your personal circumstances too.
Right.
I should say Ken and I are both startup geeks, so we're like really risk friendly. And I feel like so we're going to give a very risk friendly answer to this. But I think really clearly, I think one of the reasons I love investing in cybersecurity is that it's based on failure. You're going to get hacked. You can be the best cybersecurity company in the world and your product will get hacked. And so when you go to nurture those client relationships, it's really based on the idea of this is going to be expensive to build. So we're probably in this together financially and we're going to fail you at some point. Like that's the best way to start any relationship is let's all pay for this together on the guarantee that we're going to mess up. And build it with those assumptions in place and say, what do we really need this for? What do we really need it to do? And is AI really the best way to go about this now? Or if it is in 5 years, this is the team that's going to be there. The first AI company I invested in, at the point that we invested, it was not yet AI. It was a bunch of people overseas Googling and putting into a spreadsheet so that we could make it look like AI on the front end so that we could build it out on the back end as AI once we did.
Yeah.
So for the lean startup model, when you put in that stuff on the website, it all looks seamless and great.
Yeah.
While we figured out what the users actually did, we could go and build the AI model that we actually needed. And so if you can find the customers that can engage with you on that level and vice versa, then that's where the magic happens.
The thing I'd add to that is having been an investor, but also started up companies, be prepared not only to fail, but also this kind of bring you down, you keep work, you do this. You have to learn how to stay course. And I think a blank wallboard, write all sorts of things you can develop. It's so exciting to do it. But, it's a blank whiteboard. You have a lot to fill up. The other thing is, it's a big company. So you've got to multitask and, you need a good team chemistry. So everyone's going to work a lot of different jobs. The final thing I'll say is, and I think Sen will understand this, she's an important part of this ecosystem. Be prepared to raise money constantly when you do a startup.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Raising money is hard. It's always hard.
I think it's fascinating to me as I hear you folks speak. You really agree with each other. When Sen, you just said, try something, see what sticks. Essentially, I'm paraphrasing what you said. Make the mistakes early, and that's so nicely tied back to the lean startup cycle that Ken was telling us about. So I warned you about this too. I'm going to push you folks to not agree with each other, and more politely put, both of you come from such different backgrounds. And in fact, what you did not say in the introduction, Sen, is that your career started elsewhere, and then you came into investment and fintech investment, to be very specific. So given that you both come and look at the world, look at technologies in financial services, look at the financial services industry, all of this from such different lenses, my question is, what is it that you emphasize on when you're looking at something, a new concept, a new company perhaps, but really the germ of the idea being presented to you?
To me, look, I joke about being institutionalized for 25 or 30 years.
Yeah.
Large institutions. So I still have that, I was the chief credit officer, so I'm a risk person, right?
Yep.
I'm probably an entrepreneurial risk person, I guess, but I'm probably...
Yeah, you are. I've met the other ones. You are.
I'm not as aggressive probably as an investor as Sen would be, because I think that's what she has to be. The key thing maybe I look at more is everyone looks at the management team, how important they are, right? And that's the number one thing to me. When I was lending money, it wasn't the product, it wasn't the financial statements, which sounds odd because my credit training, it was always, my focus was on the management team. I loaned money to companies that had great balance sheets and had lost money. I loaned money to companies that didn't have great balance sheets, but they had great, executives and a great team. So I really that's what I look at first. That's my primary thing. I don't look at the product first. I really don't. That's probably wrong. It's probably inverse, right, Sen? The way I should look at it?
So for us, we've tried to remove ourselves personally from the equation as much as possible. So we've set up our firm to cross-check each other. So we look at three things. We look at product, market, and team. And all three legs of that stool have to be solid in order for us to invest in it. Mm-hmm. And then aside from that, my two other GPs, so what Jagati referred to is that my background is in very large hospitality intervention. So I redesigned the Coffee Plaza and I redesigned hotels internationally and then transitioned into startups, because if you can project manage a hotel on time when half of your furniture suddenly isn't coming from China over the summer, you can scale a startup. It's the same skill set. And so I have that background where I understand people and teams and how to bring something to market and how to explain that to market and how to get people on board. My other two co-founders have the skill set of a deep business expertise and VC expertise, and then just a really geeky technologist. So if you have an amazing go-to-market strategy, you're going to charm me. With no technology, you're not going to charm Pong. So we try to remove that, like, what's that magical fairy dust VC thing that you look for from it as much as possible. Also, I should say, Adrian's a Mexican-American man and Pong is a Chinese-American man. So we cross-check our own biases across the investment team as much as possible. And we try to, and in terms of team, what we look for is, we've said no to investors in our fund because it's not a good fit. We really want those people in our corner that we can call on a bad day and say, help us solve this problem, and not, try and look profitable for the quarterly board meeting because that's what people want to hear. We want to learn and grow as a team, and we've surrounded our core values around that. So when it comes down to vetting the management team, we've said no to people on both sides of the equation. And defining that out and executing on it is emotionally strenuous, but once you do it, the rewards are really high.
I think it's interesting that we're talking about high tech, whatever, and both of you came down to people at the end of the day and said, ultimately what makes or breaks something is the people involved in it, and their knowledge and experience. So let me take that one to something that's close and near to the heart of fintech women, really, which is, what is the play for women in fintech in all of this? What edge? And both of you, I think, are in your own ways uniquely placed to help us think through this.
Well, I think it's two things. I think it's careers in fintech, and also I want to encourage people to think about starting their own business. I mean, I didn't do it until later in life, but I think it's like letting the genie out of the bottle sometimes. Yeah. I enjoyed it so much. So the careers in fintech, I think there's a heavy. First of all, decide what segment you want to be in. Is it payments? Is it crypto? Is it wealth tech? There's a lot of different segments that you could look at. And there's the tendency of people think that you have to have all these software. You have to have software engineers. But there's all these other things that are needed. There's coordinators, there's analysts, there's relationship managers. There's a lot of different areas to look into fintech. And I would probably check out some special websites like Indeed.com, Dice.com, and even LinkedIn. LinkedIn, I just took a look at it before I got on this call. There was 37,000 jobs just for AI alone that are listed. Yeah. I would encourage people to don't be put off if they don't have some technical degree. There's a lot of ways to participate in fintech. And then, of course, starting a business during the Great Recession, some of the unicorns, the greatest unicorns like Venmo and Airbnb, there's no time to start like now. I would encourage people to consider that route.
Write the checks, I mean, that's what I've learned from all this is even if you don't have a lot of money to invest, I found that I feel like the next beachhead for women in fintech is for women to start writing checks into fintech. So our fund is largely investors that are willing to help a startup. And so I've pitched a lot of senior executives in banking, hands down, more men write checks than women. And until the women start owning their own finances in the way that you'd expect women in finance to, then we're just not going to get there. I still speak to senior executives that say that they have to run it by their husband before they can make an investment or something like that. And that's been surprising to me that's been such a large part of my interaction with executives. And so it has to go back into the ecosystem from women in order for us to be able to create the companies and create the jobs to do all the things.
I think that's such a fascinating perspective, because start a company and then open up your open your checkbooks. It almost, if you're investing in something, you're forced to learn it, and that's kind of getting into learning and appreciating fintech from the back door, the top door. I'm not sure, but it's a different perspective of getting to it. I'm going to do a quick time check. Are there questions from the audience for our guests?
I didn't realize we answered all the questions.
Yeah, since you're both professors, you clearly know how to do that.
Well, the thing is, what I want to encourage people is, I was once asked a question, and I was on some panel about risk management, and the students were asking me what the biggest risks were, and I didn't answer it. It was systemic this and that and technical. I said the biggest risk sometimes is with your career.
Yeah.
You don't be afraid to take a risk. Manage the risk, be prepared, research, network, all those things. But what I see in some of my students is they're afraid to make a mistake. Like Sam was talking about, they're afraid to make a mistake, take a risk. It's not a risk when you're managing a process and you're betting on yourself. I really, I wish I had learned that when I was in my 20s and 30s.
Yeah. That's great advice. So
I don't have a question, but I have a comment that I find really upsetting, I guess, and that is that more men, I didn't know this, write the checks. I think that is very slowly changing. I'm involved in a couple organizations, and it's women promoting women, which I think, women lifting up women. And unfortunately, it does appear to me that women have not typically done that. And I think that we are at the cusp of this really changing. Women have, run 51% of all the households, et cetera. They really do make the financial decisions, but many of them, for whatever the reason, are living sort of, at a socioeconomic level that doesn't allow them the opportunity, perhaps. But I do think it's changing. And I do think that as I said, I'm involved in a couple of these things, and I'm shocked that even though these women sort of entrepreneur type, whether you call them seed capital or whatever, venture firms, the ones I'm involved with, a lot of women, but there are a couple men. And it's very, it's encouraging for me to see it, because 5 years ago, that was not the case, that it was probably more men, maybe, but it definitely is changing. So I think we're on, we're getting better, but we have a lot more work to do.
Len, I think you want to get, my experience, I remember going to the workshop, it was like the first or second time, that I participated with FinTech Women, and I learned that women don't go after a career, or a job, because they're only a 65, they have to be a 95% match. I never realized that. I'm the type that, if it's 65 or 70, I'm going to give it a shot. So I think maybe you got to get women to trust themselves a little bit more and go out the risk curve a little bit.
I think it's also, I think one of the things that women do a lot is they look at other women and they assume success. And there's been psychological studies on this that, of course, I can't cite right now. But like, if you see a woman doing something, you kind of assume a lot about what's going on the back end of that may or may not be true. part of the reason that we started this venture capital firm was that when I got pregnant, my desk was moved under the stairs at the firm I was working. They put me in the basement under the stairs because I was pregnant. And I was like, you know what? It's a lot easier to impact change when you're holding $500,000 under someone's nose than not. So let's open a venture capital firm. and when you are able to advocate, and I know that comes from an extreme level of privilege for me to even be able to do that. But when you're able to advocate on any level like that, you'll find people come out of the woodwork to support you. We have, most of our investors are men. Almost all of them know my kids. Almost all of them have seen them in the office. They know it, 3 o'clock, I'm doing a pickup. And so because we needed that community of support in order for us to be able to execute on this, we found that community of support. And so if you can push yourself even just a little bit in that direction every day, it's amazing how much the world comes forward to meet you.
Well, I have an old story, but 16 years ago, I joined Bank of New York Mellon, and Bank of New York said, you have to come to New York. And I said, look, I got 2 kids and my husband's traveling like 90% of the time. I can't right now. Move to New York. And 3 months later, I heard back from the guy who wanted to hire me, and he said, we got it. And I said, what'd you get? He said, we got you the ability to work from home. So I think you're absolutely right. When you see something that you say, I want this, but I need it on my terms. Like you said, 3 o'clock, I got to go pick up the kids or whatever the pickup is. I said, I want this job and I know I can do it, but I can't be, I said, I can come to New York like every day. I can get on a shuttle at 6 a.m., but I cannot live there. I can't take my kids out of school. I can't move. I just can't do it right now. And I didn't bring it off the table. But, I questioned it and I said, this is what I need. And I felt that I wasn't, I had a job, so it wasn't, I was in a very, fortunate place. But I asked the question. They went to the vice chairman. This was 16 years ago. They went to the vice chairman to get me that job. And I think it just proves if you ask, if you have the confidence to ask, to put yourself outside of a comfort zone that says, would this work for you? I think you can get what you need out of it. Like telling your investors, 3 o'clock, I got to pick up, my kids or whatever. People, we have lives, I think one of the great things about, I think, COVID is that we all see the cat walking across, the kid coming in the room, we have lives.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we also bring it, like both of our guests have done, also with your screens at the back, not like mine today. You're bringing that to every conversation. You're bringing your life to every conversation, which I think is phenomenal.
Oh, Jagati, these are my husband's toys, not my kids' toys. I live with a toy collector.
See, now the world knows so much more about Adrienne. That's fantastic. So, being respectful of people's time, I have to wrap this one up. But this has been so delightful. Before I wrap up, two kind of quick, from a housekeeping standpoint. In 2 weeks from now, we're going to wrap up our 2020 series of FinTech Women Virtual, and we're celebrating women leaders in FinTech by having 2 Boston-based women CEOs of FinTech companies come and talk to us. So we're very excited for everybody on this call and others. Watch for that, for the information around that coming, and hopefully hope that all of you will join us for that. And then hear from not housekeeping, but really, this has been so fantastic. We have to do the Sen and Ken part 2 at some point, because I'm on a mission to see what is it you folks disagree with. But everything that you've given us today, from being bullish with AI, particularly with COVID, AI is not your art project. I'm going to hold on to that one for a bit. And then take a risk, get that step. Both of you kind of literally echoed each other on that one. So those are my 3 takeaway messages. And I want to thank both of you for joining us today and giving and sharing all of your experience and insights with us.
Well, thanks for the invite. And, anyone on the call, if they want to link in with me, if I can help them, I love what you're doing. I think what hooked me is when I met you and all these fabulous people, and I went through the workshop. That was a lot of fun for me to go through that whole day. It was great.
Yeah.